Okay, welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong. and yeah, we've got a doozy of an episode here. Yeah, Mr. K is somebody that I knew back in my high school days, and he was a right winger back then, and he's stayed as a right winger. And I debunk the crap that he posts on his Facebook page or his Facebook wall. And this time, we've got a big one because it involves Jeffrey Epstein. So he posted a meme with a fake squirrel in handcuffs, and it says, let me get this straight. I want to state it exactly accurately. It says they've arrested more squirrels than Epstein clients. So the message being that hey, what's going on? How come they're not arresting Epstein related people? Although the ominous thing here is that this was posted by a group called Conservatives Today, and interestingly, you might not have guessed this, but Donald Trump had Epstein ties. So let's get something straight here to start with. A meme mocking a fake squirrel in handcuffs isn't edgy. It's a deflection and a weird one too. Like okay, I think this links to a story some years back where they euthanized a squirrel, somebody's pet squirrel or something, and the Republicans acted like it was a national scandal or something. I mean, to be fair, it's a bit of a sad story, but it was a fad story. And the meme here pretends to demand justice for Epstein's clients while ignoring the actual political connections and proven cases of abuse within its own ranks. You know the Republican uh, links to Epstein, and Trump was close to Epstein, and that's not in dispute. Donald Trump was he was not some distant acquaintance of Jeffrey Epstein. He didn't just meet him once, like at a party or something. He partied with him, and he apparently had close ties. In 2002, Trump told New York Magazine, quote, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." So that's not exactly subtle. And Trump also appeared in videos from Epstein's Mar a Lago parties, laughing and chatting while women danced around. Years later, a woman filed a lawsuit accusing Trump of, assaulting her when she was 13 at an Epstein hosted party. The suit was withdrawn under disputed circumstances, but the allegation is serious. He's also been accused of misconduct by over 25 women, and this includes, people who were in the, I think it was the, what is it, the Teen USA pageant or something like that. And he bragged to, I believe, Howard Stern about his ability to just go backstage while, the contestants were in varying stages of being undressed. He joked that he could just say he was inspecting. So this isn't just about guilt by association, it's about a pattern. So Trump's own comments about his daughters are creepy too. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of these, but there's some little creepy moments that really should have been a little bit more disqualifying, maybe a lot more disqualifying. So I remember back when there was a politician running for president on the Democratic Party ticket, and he just shouted excitedly, and he was disqualified in the public eye. People thought his excited shout was just too quirky and weird. But I guess you can perv on your own daughters, and that's not too weird or whatever. So on The View, Howard Stern and the Wendy Williams show, Trump routinely made disturbing remarks about his daughters, especially Ivanka. On The View, I believe it was in 2006, Trump said, if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. And they kind of nervously laughed about it and noted that, it was a weird thing to say. And sure enough, it was. On Wendy Williams, I believe this was in 2013, when asked about what he and Ivanka have in common, he answered, "Well, I was going to say sex, but I can't relate that to her." But you just did, you know. And keep in mind that one was unprovoked. I keep emphasizing this whenever I do mention this, that it's a different scenario from being on Howard Stern. Howard Stern, love him or hate him, but he had a way of sometimes making people say things that maybe they didn't mean, or maybe they would regret later on, because they could be misconstrued or something like that. He had a way of doing that, but this was totally unprovoked, at least in this clip on the Wendy Williams show. And how many people do you know who, if you ask, like, if it's a father, what they have in common with their daughter, how many of them would say that they have sex in common with them? Well, more than a little creepy. That's a pretty, almost damning statement to make. And these aren't just gaffes. These are things that he just casually said. They weren't mistakes. He had a repeated pattern of saying such things, and they're part of a long running pattern of objectifying underage girls, including his own children. He was also on the show with Robin Leach, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, I believe. And there's a clip of that you can find where he's talking about what his newborn, his, well, not, I don't know if it was a newborn, but infant daughter had in common with his wife at the time. And he noted the parts of the anatomy, like the legs, and then he was like motioning to the chest. He's like, I don't know if she's going to have these yet. So he's got a long pattern of objectifying his own female children. And the conservative party, the Republican Party, has its own pedophile problem. I know you're not supposed to say that word on YouTube, but there it is. So before pointing fingers, the conservatives should clean house. So here are a few examples. Dennis Hastert, former Republican Speaker of the House and the longest serving Speaker of the House, from what I gather, he was convicted of paying hush money to cover up his abuse of teenage boys when he was a high school coach. He's been called a serial, you know, a, a serial abuser by federal prosecutors. Roy Moore, the failed Alabama Senate candidate, was credibly accused of pursuing teenage girls while in his 30s, and conservatives still backed him. Matt Gaetz, the former GOP congressman whose career seems to be in shambles. Anyway, he was under investigation for sex trafficking a minor. And yeah, some people out there would be like, oh, well, she was 17, and that's legal in some states, but it wasn't legal in the state where she was being trafficked. So you can't even totally get away with that sort of argument in that case. But he was a prominent person in politics, so with the current climate, they let him get away with it, without you know having the same fate for him that happened to somebody else who was involved in that scandal. And in some of these cases, people have actually gone to prison. So you know Ghislaine Maxwell went to prison. Jeffrey Epstein did. Um, somebody who was, it related to the Matt Gates case went to prison. And of course, there have been countless pastors, youth group leaders, and GOP donors who've been arrested for possession of child, what, or, abuse. And none of this is intended as whataboutism. You know, Bill Clinton was a Jeffrey Epstein associate, and then the allegations against him are plain. And there are some other people on the left who apparently were in his orbit, and celebrities, and that there's an extensive list you could find. Of course, some people are falsely accused of being associated with him or whatever, and it's a tricky issue too, because there's the whole guilt by association thing. If somebody is alleged to do something, there are people in their orbit who might be falsely accused of being in on it. So there's a it's a bit of a tricky situation in that regard. But this stuff I'm talking about with Republicans, it's directly relevant. If you're going to meme about Epstein's client list and these abuse scandals, start with the people you supported and still defend, Mr. K, and other people out there who are prominent Republicans. I would have no problem whatsoever with Bill Clinton going to prison. If especially if it could be proved that, or proven, I guess would be the correct grammatical word, but if it could be proven that he, you know, was actually an abuser, I would have no problem. And not just because I'm not a fan of Bill Clinton. I want to make that clear. Same thing with any number of other people. And coincidentally, regarding other crimes, of a not sexual nature, if it's a person who's complicit in genocide, for example, I wouldn't mind, I wouldn't shed a tear if they end up in prison. So, really, the question here is, where's the accountability? The question isn't why hasn't more been done about Epstein's clients. It's why do the people sharing this meme still idolize Trump, cover for creeps like Dennis Hastert, and ignore accusations against their own in general? And it's a failure of the Democrats, frankly, to not distance themselves from Bill Clinton. They should do that. They should really distance themselves from the Clintons for general reasons anyway. But based on this perceived association with Epstein, it would just be a slam dunk decision. It'd be a home run decision. But I guess they're too stupid to do it, or whatever. And the same thing is true with the Republican Party too. Like, wouldn't you want to have a sort of clean slate if possible? But I guess not. They prefer these poisoned reputations. So you don't get to demand justice while propping up certain enablers. And interestingly enough, there are reports that Virginia Jeffrey, a prominent accuser of Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew, has died. So Jeffrey accused Epstein and Prince Andrew of abuse and trafficking, and she died at the age of 41. Her family reported that she died by suicide at her farm in Western Australia. So that's a bit of an interesting development. And Jeffrey's family described her as a fierce warrior against abuse and trafficking, and said she was the light that lifted so many survivors. And her death has been investigated, or is currently being investigated. And there are some people saying that it was not suspicious. But of course, a lot of people out there are going to be suspicious of it, especially when Epstein himself has become a meme. The meme is that he did not kill himself and all that stuff. So there's also the Prince Andrew allegations too. Like that's interesting, and people should be considering that as well. So it's an international thing. It's not just you know in the United States. And there was other accusers who have somehow died. Jeffrey is the third Epstein accuser to die since 2017. There's another one named Carolyn Andriano who testified against Ghislaine Maxwell, who is said to have died of a drug overdose in 2023. And then there's somebody named Lee Sky Patrick, who I've been led to believe died of a drug overdose in 2017. So what's with these drug overdose deaths all of a sudden? You know, I guess you could say I'm engaging in conspiracy theories here, but by implication. But I mean, the cases themselves, they're a little bit mysterious sounding. I'll just put it that way. I'll leave you to be the judge. Am I going too far in thinking that those are a little bit strange? That there have been two drug overdoses, one alleged suicide. Well, I guess I'm not supposed to say that word on YouTube, but there it is. But anyway, feel free to let me know what you think. I'm sure some of you are going to disagree with me on something here, but whatever. All right. Have a good day.